rather cold duct tape studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. And yes, it is cold down here. It is negative 13 degrees Fahrenheit in the Yorkville area as I'm recording this. Now, granted, you don't see condensation, but it is chilly. But regardless of the temperature, today I am going to share my review of Shadowdark from the Arcane Library. This is designed by Kelsey Dion with artwork provided by Lucas Court, Brandish Gilhelm, Jesse Egan, Yuri Perkowski Dominguez, Matt Morrow, Matt Ray, Mark Lyons, and Abdul Latif. And I apologize, I guarantee I've mispronounced some of those names. Sorry about that. This 326-page hardcover is arriving in stores. It's going to carry an MSRP of approximately $60. Reason why I say approximately is I've seen some conflicting MSRP information. So I'll just say around $60. Now, the PDF is available now, and I can give you an exact price on that. It's $29. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Shadowdark. Couple of things I want to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, the fine folks over at the Arcane Library were kind enough to provide me with this review copy. But neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's very, very important that you know that, and doubly so in the case of Shadowdark, because I know I've heard things online talking about different reviewers getting paid to do reviews of this and so on and so forth. To be honest, I have no idea about any of that. But there is one thing I can tell you with the utmost certainty, and that is since the Gaming Gang launched in 2010, we have never accepted any sort of payment in order to provide a review. So there is that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of Shadowdark, but I do want to give you a very good feel for what's in this book, as well as share my thoughts about it too. So let's get stuck in. So one of the first things I will mention, if you are not overly familiar with Shadowdark, is this is an old school flavored fantasy role-playing game. Now, this is not what most people would consider to be OSR. And I tend to define OSR as the old school Renaissance. I know some people say revival, all different things. But this is not an old school Renaissance title because this is not a retro clone. This is not built upon original Dungeons & Dragons or basic expert Dungeons & Dragons or advanced Dungeons & Dragons. This shares far more DNA with 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons than earlier editions of D&D. Now, there is a lot of talk online about how Shadowdark doesn't reinvent the wheel, and this is just a conglomeration of all these mechanics that are found in all these other games. And while that is true to a certain extent, I honestly don't think anyone at the Arcane Library ever claimed that Shadowdark was going to revolutionize role-playing games. Now, granted, the Kickstarter was highly successful. It pulled in over $1.3 million, which I'm sure shocked everyone involved over at the Arcane Library. But I've never heard anybody from the Arcane Library say that, oh, this is just brand new and revolutionary and we're reinventing the wheel. I haven't encountered that. So let's talk about the game itself. And what I'll do is we'll kind of page through here and I will tackle each of these sections as we go along. So first off, we're going to start off with creating characters, and you're going to have a lot of different options in Shadowdark. It's one of the things that I really like about Shadowdark is that you'll have core mechanics, and then you've got all these different little options and variants that you can toss in to kind of make the game your own. This is very modular. So once you establish these core mechanics, which I'll talk about in just a bit, you can kind of add and subtract things to make it your own game. So as an example, we have an option of doing 0-level characters, which of course have been made popular by a lot of the Dungeon Crawl Classics adventures out there. So the way it's designed is you can run gauntlet adventures so that your players have multiple characters, and whoever survives to the end becomes their characters, and they actually become first-level characters. Or you can completely ignore this and just start off at first level. So we do have our traditional attributes here. They're just called stats: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. We've got the 3 to 18 range. We do have a bit different modifiers than we've seen in old school Renaissance games. So we've got +4, and then we also go all the way down to -4. We have various different ancestry, which each ancestry will give you a certain special ability. So we've got dwarves, elves, goblins, half-orcs, halflings, and humans. And then we've got the 4 traditional fantasy classes with the fighter. Well, here it's the priest, but it's a cleric. We also have the thief and the wizard. And all the information about each class is 1 page. So here we've got the fighter. It's going to tell us, okay, so what are these additional talents that you'll get for being the fighter? So you get hauler, weapon mastery, and grit. Then we also get a table down here for fighter talents, which when you level up, you're going to roll on this and you're going to get that additional talent. So you might gain weapon mastery with an additional weapon type, or +1 to melee and ranged attacks, +2 to strength, dexterity, or constitution. Choose an armor, get to add +1 to the armor class, or get to add 2 points to any of your stats. You can break it up however you want, or you can choose a talent. So I know some people out there may not necessarily like the randomness to the character advancement. To be honest, I wish this was more of like 20 entries as opposed to rolling 2d6. Maybe you roll a 20-sided die, have a little bit more variety. So we also have the priest, we have the wizard. They are spellcasters. Here we're going to have by level the number of spells that they will know. There are no spell slots in Shadowdark. That was something when I was doing my first look video and I just happened to see where it's talking about spells known. I kind of jumped to the assumption that this had spell slots. It does not. Magic using classes will have to successfully roll to cast spells. Myself personally, I like that. We also have spells backfiring and things along those lines. Now, one thing you may notice as we're taking a peek through is pretty large font. To me personally, this feels like a bit too much empty space. So I would have liked to have seen either a smaller page count with tighter text, maybe smaller font or better use of layout, or kept the page count and had more content. Because the reality is, for what's essentially an A5 size hardcover, I think $60 is a little pricey. And $29 for a PDF, kind of pricey. Just being honest. So you'll also see that a lot of the information is just bite-sized nuggets. So very concise, very easy for you to digest. We've also got loads and loads of random tables for a variety of different things. And because Shadowdark is so modular, you can really take things you like, put them in. Also, if you've got options here that maybe isn't really your bag of tricks, you can always leave them behind as well. But one aspect of Shadowdark you will see throughout the book is just concise, to the point, but I will also point out that some folks might find some of this to be a little too short as opposed to going into a little more detail or having a lot more options. So as an example, our weapons. These are all of our weapons. Now, the reality, did we need 30 different pole arms in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons? No. And yes, I know there aren't really 30, but there's a lot. For the most part, I'm fine with this. The gear section is pretty short, not a ton to it, but we've got various different tables for character names. We've got a bunch of tables for random encounters. Experience points are given for treasure, so not given for killing monsters. If you don't like that, you can change it. Advancement is pretty simple, where you're looking at 10 experience points and then you wipe out all your experience points. Then to get to second level, you're looking at 20, 30, 40, and so on. So that's where you're going to level up. But keep in mind, when you level up, you're going to wipe out all of your experience points. So what it essentially breaks down to is your current level times 10. So just kind of flipping on through here. Now, as far as magic users, as I mentioned, you're going to have to successfully cast spells. There are magical mishaps. And just like Dungeon Crawl Classics, if you fail your spell casting, then you essentially forget that spell. So you have to rest, restudy. You cannot use the spell again. But as long as your spell casting rolls are successful, you get to continue to cast that spell. I personally like that. Now, it also means that your magic using classes are going to have fewer spells available to them than they would in other fantasy role-playing games like, say, 5e, D&D, or Pathfinder, and so forth. But I don't mind that. Now, as you can see here, we're looking at the different spell listings. There are 5 tiers of spells, so we do not have levels. We have tiers. And one of the things that I like, which kind of comes from the old school, is just very short spell descriptions. We don't have to read 2 pages just to understand what an invisibility spell does. So I appreciate that quite a bit. There are a good number of spells, and there are a good number more wizard spells than there are priest spells. So as far as the core mechanics of Shadowdark, we are looking at using a 20-sided die for most actions that you have to roll dice for. You're going to have a difficulty class, and you are going to look to meet or exceed that number on a 20-sided die. And of course, you're going to use whatever modifiers, negative or positive, that you happen to have based on your talents, class, your heritage, background, what have you. Now, one thing I thought is pretty cool is we have a random table of backgrounds, which give a little bit more flavor to each of the characters, but they're kind of all over the place. So you've got things where, as far as talents go, you've got a character can perform surgery, and then you'll have another talent where it's, okay, so +1 to melee or ranged attacks. It's like, okay. To be honest, I wish there had been a little more invested into the talents, because I think they're really interesting, and I think they really are a selling point to the various different characters. Obviously enough, you are not going to have anywhere near the sort of customization for the player characters as you would in a great many fantasy role-playing games. Shadowdark is aimed at dungeon delving, so there is not a lot of detail towards overland travel, wilderness adventuring. I would think that we should see a supplement at some point in time arrive from the Arcane Library, or probably from a third-party publisher, because I know there is a third-party license for Shadowdark out there. But once again, that's something I would have liked to have seen in the book. Now, there is a page devoted to overland travel. So yes, there is that, but not a lot of detail. One aspect of Shadowdark that is a big deal is that none of the ancestries have dark vision of any sort. So I think the only one that's sort of got it, if I remember correctly, are the dwarves. Light is important when you're exploring ancient ruins or down in, the depths of a dungeon. And that's one of the aspects I don't think it's played up enough in modern role-playing games as far as doing dungeon delves, is when the lights go out, things are going to get bad fast. They really, really will. Plus, having a light source and being in an ancient ruin, and there's monsters down there that already have adapted to the lack of light, when they see light heading their way, they know something's up. So I like that quite a bit. And the way it works is your torches last for an hour of real time. Is everybody going to stick to that? Probably not. But once again, this is a game that is very modular. If you don't care for that, replace it with some standard timing rules for light sources, because we do have combat rounds. We do have turns, so you can utilize that as well. So as far as combat, once again, 20-sided die. You're looking to overcome the armor class. We've got various different sizes of dice to roll for damage depending on your weapon. Here's the overland travel I was just talking about. But as an example, combat, 2 pages. So everything is very short, very to the point. This is a very deadly game, as with any game that is influenced by the old school, although there is kind of a death timer. So if you're reduced to 0 hit points, you're going to roll a 4-sided die, add your constitution bonus to it, and that's how many rounds you have before your character expires. Now, if you want, you can throw that option out and just have, well, you hit 0 hit points, you're checking out, you're buying the farm. There's an example of play, very short. Then we get into the Game Master section, and these are just kind of tips and tricks, kind of getting into how to present the game, different ways of running Shadowdark, depending on what you're looking to achieve. Here's the gauntlet, talking about the gauntlet here. Now, the other aspect of the core mechanics is the always on initiative, which comes from index card role-playing. Although index card role-playing is a little bit different as far as their initiative. And what you're looking at is all the players are going to roll 20-sided die, and whatever dexterity bonuses you have available, you're going to add to your roll. Whoever's got the highest is going to have initiative first, and then it's going to go clockwise around the table. So very similar to how people play board games. And you're going to stick to that up until a situation where the party is surprised, and then you're going to re-roll that and then go with the new initiative order. I would say out of all the mechanics that I've experienced in Shadowdark, I think that's the one that's going to be ignored the most. I got to be honest, I like the initiative system for index card role-playing because you roll it every time there's an encounter, not every time that the party gets surprised. So every time you have an encounter, everybody's rolling their initiative, and everybody's hoping that the game master is not the one who rolls the highest, because that means all the baddies are going to go first. So we do have loads and loads of random tables. This is that section with the various different random encounters based on location and terrain. Quite a lot of page space is devoted to these encounters. I appreciate the various different encounter tables. I don't necessarily think I needed about 30 pages worth of them, but they're pretty cool. The encounters themselves are pretty interesting. And if you want to just run a game on the fly, I suppose you could sit there and just be randomly rolling up encounters and kind of going from there. The artwork throughout, I really like. It is relatively uniform, even though we have a variety of different artists. We have information about creating your own monsters, and then we get into a bestiary. And as you can see, there are a lot of entries packed into these pages. In fact, right here, we've got 6 entries. This is one of those situations where I personally think the information is too concise, that it's too brief, that I would have liked to have seen this fleshed out a bit more. Because I say it all the time when I get to bestiaries and fantasy role-playing games, the most important thing, in my opinion, as a game master, is how do you make these creatures and NPCs and monsters and wild animals unique and different from one another outside of just stat blocks. Because a busy game master does not have time to sit down and try to decipher what stat blocks mean when we're talking about attributes. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I will say, we do have a lot of entries in this bestiary. Now, something else that I think really stands out for Shadowdark is I feel that it would be very, very easy for you to convert not only old school adventures to Shadowdark, but also 5e adventures to Shadowdark, because we are using that difficulty class. We are using the roll high on a 20-sided die. Should also mention there is advantage and disadvantage too. So this, as I said when I first started this review, there is a lot of shared DNA between Shadowdark and 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Then we get into treasure. We get a bunch of different treasure tables. We get some unique treasure. We've got mundane items. We've got magic items. We've got entries for various different items too. Personalities for sentient items. Here's some of the specific magic items here. Blade of Vengeance, Circlet of Wisdom, Egg of the Cockatrice, a Genie Lamp. So you can see there is a good amount of content packed within the 326 pages. But once again, I will say that I wish that we just had a bit more content on each page. I mean, it's not a huge deal, but it is something that I really noticed. And it does make the book feel as if the page count is a little bit inflated. So last thing I want to talk about the physical aspect of the book is, now you just saw me page through. This does not want to sit flat. And that is usually an indicator of there might be a problem with that binding down the line. So even if I close the book, you can see that this just wants to pull, and I have to sit there and kind of play with it to kind of get it to where it's straightened again. And unfortunately, if I just leave the book sitting there and come back later on, it will, not to the extent you just saw, but even here, you can see that it's kind of pulling again. Now, that's not to say that this is not going to be able to hold up to repeated use at your game table. I am just pointing out just the way the binding is, little odd. Now that we've taken a look inside Shadowdark, let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. So there are a lot of things that I really, really like about Shadowdark, and then there are some other things I'm not overly keen on. But the first thing I want to address is what I feel is sort of an elephant in the room, and that is the fact that there are a lot of people online and even making comments on the first look video I did for Shadowdark who are essentially saying that, well, Shadowdark is just a bunch of stolen mechanics all assembled into a book being presented as if it's some revolutionary role-playing game, and it isn't. The one thing I keep hearing a lot of, it's a ripoff of old school essentials, which couldn't be further from the truth. Now, let's be very honest. Shadowdark is made up of a lot of mechanics that we have seen elsewhere. I've already pointed out, shares a lot of DNA with 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, but there are mechanics that I have seen in Dungeon Crawl Classics, The Black Hack, Mouse Ritter, Index Card Role-Playing, and more. Now, remember, there is no copyright on game mechanics. So accusing people of stealing mechanics is silly. And using old school essentials as your sounding board against Shadowdark is kind of silly because old school essentials, as much as I really dig it, I think it is very well done if you have experience in role-playing games. It is simply a cleaned up, basic, and expert Dungeons and Dragons. And if you get Advanced Fantasy, it is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons applied to basic, expert Dungeons and Dragons. Once again, love the work that Necrotic Gnome has done with old school essentials, but it is not new, nor is it revolutionary. And neither is Shadowdark. But Shadowdark does a lot of things really, really well. And I can't imagine Shadowdark is actually aimed at gamers like myself or like many of the grognards who are going to check out this review. Of course, I have loads and loads of old school Renaissance role-playing games. I have a few new SR fantasy role-playing games. In fact, I would probably sit there trying to figure out which of those systems I would run if I were going to run some fantasy role-playing game campaign. Well, Shadowdark is essentially, in my opinion, aimed at people who are familiar with 5e D&D, who maybe only play 5e D&D. I think this is aimed at game masters who want to expose their players to more of an old school vibe at the game table, as opposed to the high fantasy, characters mean everything, characters don't die, 5e Dungeons and Dragons. I think that is really the audience for Shadowdark. I like a lot of what's going on in this. I love that everything makes sense. There isn't a lot of wasted verbiage. It gets right to the point, sometimes to its detriment, I will point out. But I like how everything is presented. It makes sense. And you're never sitting there scratching your head, well, what does Kelsey mean by that? No, it's all very, very intuitive. Is this book aimed at newcomers to the hobby? No, I don't think so. I think you need to have some experience in role-playing games. They don't have to be fantasy role-playing games, just some role-playing games in order to get the most out of Shadowdark. I think the artwork throughout is really well done, fairly uniform as well, even though we've got quite a few different artists. I mean, it doesn't all look exactly the same, but it does incorporate that old school vibe that I remember paging through the various different old D&D books way back in the day. So I really like that quite a bit. Of course, yes, I got some quibbles with the bestiary, and sure, I don't think I needed so many of those random encounter tables. And in some ways, it does feel like the page count is a bit inflated and the hardcover's a little bit pricey. So is the PDF. But man, there is so much I really like about Shadowdark. So when I balance everything out, I think the best way I can sum up Shadowdark would be, would I run it with my gang? And the answer to that would be, hell yes, I would run Shadowdark. I like it quite a lot. And the things that I'm not so keen on, especially mechanically, I would just toss out and replace with something from one of the multitude of OSR games I already own. So I have to say, on a scale of 0 to 10, I do recommend Shadowdark. I think it's really well done. I am super excited to see what else might be coming out on the horizon for Shadowdark from the Arcane Library. And I give this an 8 out of 10. I think it's that good. Certainly recommended. I have my quibbles, but I certainly did enjoy reading through Shadowdark, and I can certainly guarantee I and my gang would enjoy playing Shadowdark as well. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you will not find here on the YouTube channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. I will be rocking out of here so I can go warm up. And until I see you next time, here's hoping all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.